We're just hours away from Republicans taking control of the House of Representatives, and tonight, Kevin McCarthy might just be the most nervous man in Washington. You see, McCarthy really wants to be Speaker of the House. It has been his singular focus in Washington for years, and that drive is the reason behind his deal with the devil that he made with Donald Trump. McCarthy has spent years placating Trump and enabling his worst behavior in exchange for Trump's support and the support of his hardline allies in Congress for his eventual speakership. It's why McCarthy went from saying this in the days after January 6th.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
He went from saying that to going down to Mar-a-Lago 2 weeks later to kiss Trump's ring and to beg his forgiveness. So now McCarthy's time is finally here. Tomorrow, the House convenes and the speakership vote takes place. And it looks like some of Trump's most fervent supporters in Congress might now throw Kevin McCarthy under the bus anyway. You see, because of the Republicans' surprisingly thin majority in the House, McCarthy can only afford 4 Republican defectors during tomorrow's vote. And reporting indicates there may be anywhere from 5 to 10 so-called Never Kevin MAGA congressmen who are not currently supporting McCarthy, including Matt Gaetz of Florida and Andy Biggs of Arizona. Now, if McCarthy does not get the support he needs during the first ballot of the vote, it will be the first time in 100 years that the vote goes to a second ballot. Even if McCarthy ultimately does clinch the job, he could be starting from a historically weak position, which may be why some Republican partisans are loudly pushing for McCarthy in right-wing media.
I think the Republican Party right now is in the greatest danger of meltdown that it's been since 1964. I thought at least the House was going to be a sign of stability, and these 5 guys decide to go out as kamikazes and see if they can't sink the whole Republican Party, and that's what they're doing. This is not about Kevin McCarthy. This is about the right of any 5 members to basically throw away the entire rest of the conference.
And the would-be speaker himself is making an enormous number of concessions to shore up support for his bid, including reinstating the Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to her committee assignments, which she previously lost as punishment for past statements advocating violence against members of Congress and spreading offensive conspiracy theories. McCarthy's also reportedly pledged to support Marjorie Taylor Greene's bonkers proposal to hold investigations into whether January 6th insurrectionists are being held as, I hope you're sitting down, I'm not, political prisoners. But it doesn't end there. McCarthy's also promised to bring back an old congressional rule called motion to vacate the chair. As McCarthy's proposed it, the rule would allow any group of 5 disgruntled Republicans at any time to force a vote on whether or not to fire him as Speaker. It's the same process, by the way, that was essentially used to push the former Republican Speaker, John Boehner, out of the job back in 2015. Bringing it back would effectively kneecap McCarthy's speakership from the get-go. But in a recent letter, 9 current and incoming House Republicans told McCarthy that even those concessions don't go far enough, which means we could see even more groveling and appeasement before the day is done tomorrow. For his part, McCarthy's projecting confidence.
McCarthy, do you have the votes for Speaker locked in tomorrow?
I think we're going to have a good day tomorrow.
What are your conversations like with members?
Good to see you.
Are you prepared to make more concessions in exchange for more support?
I hope you all have a very nice New Year's.
A staffer, by the way, for McCarthy was even seen wheeling McCarthy's belongings into the Speaker's office, which could make for an awfully embarrassing scene should he ultimately lose. But even if he wins, it certainly seems like his deal with the devil, with Trump and Trumpism, will end like it always does, in further embarrassment and betrayal. Annie Carney is a congressional correspondent at the New York Times, where she reported on Kevin McCarthy's struggles to keep his conference in line. Tim Miller is a former spokesman for the Republican National Committee, who's currently a writer-at-large at The Bulwark. They both join me now. Good evening to both of you and a Happy New Year. Annie, nice to see you again. What's the likelihood of Kevin McCarthy being Speaker by the end of tomorrow?
Even his allies are saying they don't quite see a path to 218, the magic number that he needs to win the vote. But, you know, there's still hours to go. There's deals to do. It's difficult to see how it works out. As you said, there's 5 hard no's. Perhaps even more concerning than that is these 9 or 10 Republicans that signed this letter on Sunday, who are kind of, we don't know where they are. They're indecisive. It's harder for McCarthy to count votes when he doesn't quite know where they stand. That included a few incoming freshman lawmakers. So the numbers aren't there for him right now. Something could happen between now and tomorrow morning. One thing that pro-McCarthy people are saying is the biggest thing he has going in his favor is that there's not a clear alternative. We can talk about that a little bit later, but there's not, like, their main argument has been, okay, you don't like Kevin McCarthy, but who is, so what? So what's your plan? There's not like a Paul Ryan standing in the wings right now. So they think they have that going for them. We'll see. I'm not going to make a prediction right now. This is a very volatile situation.
You are wise. You've been in this business for a long time. You're wise enough to do that, not to do that. Tim, let's address what Annie was saying. She said we'll talk about it later. Let's talk about it right now. There isn't a clear alternative. There's Andy Biggs, who some people voted for. About 15% of the conference suggested they might take him. I don't know whether that was just a protest. But what happens if Kevin McCarthy doesn't have the 218 he needs? Do they just keep voting until they decide on Kevin McCarthy? Because look, I guess anything can happen. What are some of the possibilities?
Conceivably, they keep voting until they end up with Kevin McCarthy, and I think the 5 "quote unquote" never Kevins get their scalp, get more concessions. Maybe you move that motion to vacate down from 5 members to just 1 member, and so I think that there is a potential alternative in Steve Scalise, though he's not running for it. He comes from the more conservative part of the caucus traditionally than McCarthy hasn't made as many enemies in MAGA world as McCarthy has, despite all of his efforts to suck up to MAGA world. But again, Scalise isn't trying. So I think that would be a kind of situation where he might emerge should you get to ballot 4, 5, 6, and it becomes clear that these never McCarthys really aren't going to budge. I think the reality of this situation is that McCarthy is more likely than not to end up getting it. You get at least one of the 5 to give in, and then he has the votes. But he's not Speaker in any meaningful sense if these folks are running the show, right? If they're in charge, and he might get the bust, he might get to sit behind Biden at the State of the Union, but who's actually the leader of the party, if he has to make concession after concession to the Matt Gaetzes of the world?